if you want to, you can just go on raptureless.com and just read it for free. You can just go read it for free. But if you want to actually get a hard copy, we have that. This book in particular is an interesting one because there's so much historical context that we're missing. You know, even just what I was just sharing about the women in ministry thing, we're just missing so much understanding from history of what was going on scripturally. Not that the history isn't there, it's there. It's just that we as believers usually don't jump into it. And the people who do usually wear suits and ties and are very hard and boring to listen to. And we're like, you know, I like what he's saying, it's fascinating, but I'm so bored. And so it's important that we, as our stream starts to dig into and get an understanding of history that puts this stuff in context, that we grasp some of what was going on in the first century. Let me give you a for example. In the first century, there's a place called the Agora. The Agora was the public market. It's kind of the farmer's market of the first century. Now, you don't have a giant, you don't have a Trader Joe's, you don't have a Whole Foods, there's no Costco, there's no supermarket of any sort. I know, it's hard to think of a life without a Trader Joe's, but there was a time. And so, at that time, the only place you'd go and get food would be from the other farmers, and you'd trade, and you'd get animals, and you'd get all the stuff you need to get at the Agora. The thing about the Agora, though, was that they had sort of an admittance at the front door where you'd have this giant statue of the Caesar. In particular, Nero had this giant statue set up, and he said, you cannot go in without worshiping my statue first. So that presents a major problem for first century Christians, because now, how am I going to get food? Am I going to go to the Agora, worship the giant statue of Nero, kind of sell out a little bit, and go in and get food? That presents a major problem, because if you're not going to do that, where are you going to get food then? And they end up really alienated outside of society to a certain degree, where, you know, they're trying to figure out, how do we do this whole food thing without worshiping this giant statue of Caesar Nero? So the first century, there's also this thing going on where Nero, a lot of us don't know the history behind Nero. Nero is one of the most evil individuals. And I know that as a blanket statement, we've heard that, but let me give you a couple for examples. One, he has his mother executed. Two, he kicks his pregnant wife to death. He lights Rome on fire, burns a third of it to the ground, says it was the Christians who did it, and then releases a 3.5-year, 42-month persecution against the Christians. It's one of the most horrific of history. And then it ends with him at 31-year-old stabbing and committing suicide, killing himself. So this is not even an older man. This is someone in my age bracket who's this much of a psychopath, who does all this stuff and then kills himself. So Nero is a bad dude. I mean, like, not just like a blanket statement evil, like, he is evil. And the people of his generation knew that he was evil, and they recorded it. They called him a tyrant. They called him a wild beast. They had all kinds of names for him. One of the most common was they called him a beast. And so Nero has this giant statue set up out in front of the Agora, and you had to go and you had to worship this statue of Nero. Now, what was Nero called? Okay, so you had to worship this giant statue of the beast, and then before you could go in and get your food, buy, sell, trade, all that stuff, they would take, after you had paid your little amount of money to worship the statue, and then they would sacrifice an animal there, they would take a little bit of the ash off of the altar, and they would put it on you, so that they knew that you had worshipped the beast. And so they would mark your right hand or your forehead with some ash. Does this sound familiar to anybody? I mean, it could just be a little radio chip that we get implanted under our skin, but there also might be that John actually knew what he was talking about. There was something going on that they read it and they went, Oh, yeah, we know exactly what he's talking about. The mark of the beast that we have to worship to get into, to buy, sell, or trade. They knew exactly what he was talking about. It wasn't mysterious. It wasn't waiting 2,000 years for technology to be created so that we could finally have that. So, I mean, or I don't know. Maybe the Kirk Cameron movie's right, but I just tend not to think so.
Oh, that's so awesome.
Sorry, Mike Siebert. Do you have a copy of this yet? There you go. All right. You ready to really dig in?